Some 40,000 years ago, Earth was anything but hospitable. It was the tail end of the Ice Age, when glaciers covered vast lands stretching from the Arctic down through Europe and Central Asia. Snowstorms raged across the sky. The ground lay frozen, silent, and cruel. Life was not given. It was fought for. Yet somehow life endured. Herds of mammoths, giant deer, woolly rhinos still roamed. And in the shadows of those titans walked something fragile but clever. Homo sapiens. They were not the strongest, not the fastest. Their skin was bare, their hands soft. But in their minds burned fire, both real and imagined. A fire crackled beneath a canopy of branches. A tribe huddled close, wrapped in animal skins. Children whimpered, elders coughed. Around them stretched an endless void of white. The cold bit like a predator, always watching, always waiting. That was when it happened. From the tree line, two glowing embers blinked. Eyes. Silent steps pressed into snow. A creature approached, ribs visible beneath its fur, cast out by its pack. Too weak, too different, too bold. A wolf. But this one did not snarl. It did not growl or charge. It simply stood, watching the flame. A child noticed it first, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. No scream, no panic, just curiosity. The child reached down, found a meat-stained bone, and tossed it gently toward the creature. A small act, forgotten by the child in minutes, but remembered by history forever. The wolf crept forward, slowly, carefully. It sniffed the bone, then took it. It did not flee. It stayed, curled on the edge of firelight, and slept. By morning, the tribe moved on, down the icy plain toward warmth or hope or food. No one noticed the wolf following behind. Not too close, not too far, just enough. No one invited it, no one commanded it, but it chose to follow. And that, perhaps, is where it all began. In the days that followed, it kept its distance. The men watched, the women whispered, the elders worried, but the children, always the children, laughed and tossed more bones. Nights passed, the fire burned, the wolf remained. It was no longer quite a wolf, not yet a dog. Something was changing, slowly, quietly. It stopped circling, it lay closer. It stopped snarling at movement. It listened, watched, learned. The humans changed too. At first they tolerated, then they welcomed. One night a bear prowled too near. The wolf was the first to hear it, the first to growl, the first to stand. And when the humans woke, weapons in hand, they found the wolf already facing the dark. A bond had formed. No leash, no collar, no word for it. But there it was. A companion. In the white silence of the Ice Age, long before names, long before cities, long before history was carved in stone. A little wolf sat by the fire, and the world changed. It wasn't the only wolf, it was merely the first. As the tribe moved further across cold grasslands and thin forests, more eyes began to glimmer in the dark. Eyes that didn't just stalk, eyes that observed. There was something different about these humans. They didn't scatter like prey. They stayed. They lit fires. They shared food. And, most strangely of all, they stayed in one place even when the night howled. Humans threw bones behind them, scraps of meat, skins too tattered to wear. Not as gifts, but as waste. But the wolves didn't see waste. They saw invitation. At first, the pack watched from afar. Then, inch by inch, they came closer. Not all of them, only the young ones, the thin ones, the outcasts, the curious. They walked softly. They didn't growl, they didn't bite, and the humans noticed. Some of the elders threw stones, some warned of danger, but others, the women, the children, saw something else. Not teeth, not threat. They saw eyes, waiting. One night, a storm came, the worst in years. Snow swirled like ghosts. The fire barely held. The tribe huddled beneath a low rock ledge, wrapped in damp skins, coughing cold. And then, They heard it. A low whine, not a howl, not a cry. It was the same wolf, the first one. It didn't stay in the shadows anymore. It sat by the edge of the shelter, shivering, alone. One man, older than most, looked at it. No words. Just a slow hand lifting the skin flap. A gesture. Come in. And it did. It curled beside the fire, laid its head low, and slept. When morning came, there were more tracks in the snow, circling the camp, not hunting patterns, not attack paths. Just circles, as if the wolves had stood guard while the humans slept. Something changed after that. One wolf limped into camp, bleeding, dragging its leg behind it. A young female. It should have been driven away. But it wasn't. One child, now older, knelt beside it, touched its head. The wolf did not bite. It whimpered, and stayed. They wrapped its leg in fur, fed it soft meat, not medicine, not science, but kindness. And kindness is powerful. Other wolves came. Some stayed far back. Some slept close. A few began to warn the humans when danger approached. They growled when something moved in the dark. They stood still and listened long before the humans did. One night, a mother woke to find a wolf lying between her and her child, as if guarding it. She did not scream. She simply stared, and the wolf stared back. They understood. The wolves were no longer entirely wild, and the humans, no longer entirely alone. No words were spoken. There were no names yet, no language to describe what was forming. Only instinct, only understanding. A snarl now meant warning, not aggression. A stare meant alertness, not threat. One wolf discovered something new, using a stick to dig into a mound and pull out termites. The humans watched, then copied. A child shared food. A wolf returned with a kill. The sharing was mutual, without words, without promise. But it was there. For the first time in history, two species, not one, were hunting together. At night, the wolves slept closer. In the day, they moved with the tribe. They weren't pets. They weren't tamed. But they weren't just wolves anymore. They were something new, something born in the frozen silence, half wild, half trusted, balanced between the fire and the forest. A new kind of bond had been born, not by leash, not by dominance, but by choice. It was not a single event, not one wolf, not one human. It happened again and again, on ice fields, in green valleys, near rivers, across deserts. Wherever humans wandered, there was often something walking just behind them, eyes glowing in the dark, watching, waiting, and eventually, belonging. It began with a birth. One cold morning, before the sun had risen, a young she-wolf, once wounded, now healed, lay curled near the edge of the human camp. Her breath came in waves, shallow and strained. Around her the tribe slept. But a girl, no more than 10, was already awake, placing firewood into the embers. She heard it first, a low yelp, then another. The girl crept toward the sound. There, in the frost-glazed grass, lay the wolf. Her body trembled, her eyes wide with pain. But her muzzle was soft, and beneath her belly something moved. 3 tiny creatures, slick, blind, and helpless. They were born not in a den, not beneath roots or rocks, but within reach of human hands. The girl knelt, slowly, carefully. The mother did not growl. She licked her pups, then looked at the girl, tired, trusting. And just like that, a line had been crossed. This new generation, these pups, would never know the wild as their mother had. They were born not into the forest, but into the firelight. They would hear human voices before they heard the howl of a pack. They would smell cooked meat before raw. They would learn to walk among humans before learning to fear them. No one called them dogs, not yet. That word would take millennia to form. But these pups were something else, something new. And the humans knew it too. At first, the tribe was unsure. Some feared the pups. Others dismissed them as weak. But the girl, and later her mother, fed them, touched them, let them curl beside them at night, tiny bodies pressed against fur and cloth. The pups did not bite. They did not flee. They followed. They followed the girl when she gathered berries. They followed the men when they hunted. They returned when called, though no one had taught them the meaning of sound. Their ears perked at laughter. They ran toward joy. And when other wolves circled the camp, it was the pups who barked first, sharp, high-pitched warnings, unpracticed but full of instinct. They were protectors, even before they knew what protection was. One of the boys carved a piece of wood and rolled it down a slope. One of the pups chased it, caught it, brought it back. Everyone laughed. The boy threw it again. The pup brought it back. It meant nothing, and it meant everything. This was not survival. This was play. And in that moment, another wall between species began to crack. The pups grew fast, leaner than their wild cousins, more alert to human tone, less interested in running off into the forest. They belonged to neither world. Too tame for the pack, too wild for the pen. But with time, one of the males stopped trailing the hunters and walked beside them instead. He helped corner prey, barked to signal direction, sniffed out hidden trails. He was not commanded. He simply knew. The hunters began to expect him, to trust him, and when the hunt was done, the pup was fed first, after the children. A new rule, a silent one, but understood by all. These animals were no longer mouths to feed. They were hands, feet, eyes in the dark, companions. When the tribe moved, the young dogs moved too. No leash, no command, just trust. The elder who once threw stones now scratched behind ears. The woman who once feared bites now let one sleep beside her child. The boy who first played fetch now had a shadow who followed him through every step of snow and mud. The dogs brought more than help. They brought comfort, warmth at night, laughter in the day, a sense, strange and new, that no one walked alone. But the wild was still close. Sometimes the dogs vanished, drawn by instinct or the call of their wolf cousins. Some returned, some didn't, and once a dog returned wounded, fur torn, limping. It had fought another pack to protect the tribe. No one saw it happen, but they saw the blood, they saw the wounds, and they understood. The tribe gathered in silence. The old man knelt and placed his hand on the dog's head. He did not say it out loud, but in that moment, it was clear. This was not a pet, not a wolf, not a thing. This was one of them. They shared food, they shared fire, now. They shared loyalty. And with that, the story of the dog began, not with force, not with cages, but with the quiet revolution of companionship. The first dog had not yet been born, but his ancestors now lived among humans, not out of fear, not out of hunger, but because they chose to stay, and once they stayed, they never truly left. Time passed. Seasons came and went like smoke rising from a campfire, brief, flickering, but unforgettable. The pups born near the fire grew older. Some wandered, some stayed. But one, a female with golden eyes and ash-colored fur, remained always near the humans. She walked with the children. She hunted with the men. She curled beside the old woman who never spoke. And when she gave birth, she did so inside the human shelter. No cave, no burrow, just a patch of earth warmed by firelight and the soft hush of breathing humans. The tribe watched in silence as the tiny creatures emerged, eyes closed, limbs trembling, helpless, and wet. But the mother trusted. She did not bare teeth. She did not flee. And the humans did not touch. They waited. When the pups cried, the girl brought water. When the mother grew weak, the boy shared cooked meat. Not raw, cooked, gently torn, placed near her muzzle. She ate. And so did her pups. These were not wolves. They were not born into wild air. They would not crawl through dens of ice and thorn. Their first scent was smoke and ash. Their first warmth came not from fur, but from fire. And that changed everything. The pups opened their eyes earlier than usual. They walked sooner. They did not cower when touched. They wagged tiny tails when the children laughed. They imitated the rhythm of human speech, tilting their heads, learning the rise and fall of tone, as if language was a sound they were meant to catch. And when they barked, short, sharp, clear, it was not the long, mournful howl of wolves. It was something new, shorter, brighter, a sound that asked instead of warned. The tribe didn't understand it fully, not yet, but they knew something had shifted. These pups were born not of the forest, but of the fire. They weren't torn between two worlds. They belonged to this one. They followed humans without needing to be taught. They waited at the edge of the camp when the tribe returned from the hunt. They whined when a child cried and growled when strangers passed. They played more. They fought less. Their eyes held softness, not suspicion. They began to look for faces, and when they found them, they smiled in their own way. One night, as the tribe sat around the fire, an old man, whose hands shook and whose feet no longer walked far, lowered himself onto the earth. One of the young dogs, barely a year old, padded up beside him, rested its head on his knee, and stayed. No one spoke, no one moved. But in the firelight you could almost feel it. This was love, not survival, not instinct, not fear or training, just something quiet, something ancient, something powerful, and it grew, from pack to pack, from tribe to tribe. Other humans saw it. Other dogs were born. They too stayed close. They too learned the rhythms of laughter and grief, of footsteps and stillness. Some were faster, some stronger. But the ones who stayed, the ones who curled close at night, who barked when danger neared, who licked the tears from children's faces, those were the ones who thrived. Natural selection had a new rule, not just who hunted best, but who loved best. Because love, it turned out, had survival value too. Over time, their snouts shortened, their ears drooped, their bodies softened. They became less wolf, more something else. Not lesser, not broken, just different. Different in the same way that humans were different from apes. The same spark had jumped species. The wild had not been tamed. It had chosen to stay. And in doing so, it changed. Not just itself, but us. Because as the first dogs were born and raised among humans, humans too began to evolve. They slept easier. They walked farther. They hunted smarter. They had fewer reasons to fear the night. The dogs guarded. The dogs warned. The dogs healed wounds too deep for words. They were not tools. They were not slaves. They were something the world had never seen before. Friends. The world was changing. Ice melted. Rivers shifted. Forests retreated. New lands opened like unrolled maps, and with them came choices: stay or move. For humans, it was never really a question. They moved. Always. Toward warmth, toward food, toward promise. And the dogs followed. Not because they were called, not because they were forced, but because they had become part of the tribe. They walked beside humans across frozen plains where no tree grew, where the sky was nothing but endless white and the ground whispered only silence. They crossed rivers on cracked ice, paddling through frigid water when needed, always returning to the fire by nightfall. Sometimes they were carried. Other times they led. Their feet bled. Their fur froze. But they pressed on. For every man who fell to sickness or snow, there was a dog who stood watch until the end. Not barking, not leaving, just staying, quiet, still, loyal. When children cried at night, it was the dogs who curled close and warmed their hands. When danger came, Bears, rival tribes, strangers in the dark. It was the dogs who heard first, who barked first, who stood between. And over time, humans noticed something deeper. The dogs didn't just follow their paths, they remembered them. They sniffed out old campsites buried in snow. They led hunters back to places only passed once. They sensed trails invisible to any eye. They were becoming navigators. When food was scarce, humans shared their last scraps. When firewood was low, dogs brought back sticks. They were not trained to do this. They chose to. That choice, again and again, rewrote the laws of the wild. Wolves survived. Dogs belonged. Belonging was stronger than fear. It wasn't perfect. Not all journeys ended well. There were winters too long, storms too cruel. There were days when the only sound was wind and whimper. Once, a tribe buried their firekeeper, a woman who had walked with a limp and a laugh too loud. Her dog sat by the grave for 3 days, refusing food, refusing sleep, just waiting. The tribe moved on. The dog stayed. And when the tribe returned months later, the grave was covered in snow and paw prints. Some stories are not told. They are felt. But still, they move us. As tribes split, dogs spread with them. Into mountains, across deserts, along coasts where salt danced in the wind. They learned to live with fishermen, chasing gulls and watching the tide. They followed nomads through scorching dunes, their pads burning, but their spirits unbroken. They joined children as they climbed rocky ridges in search of berries. They slept beneath stars, ears twitching at every sound. And humans began to speak of them, not just as animals, but as beings. They gave them names, not many, just enough. Names carved in memory, not in stone. Names whispered by children and cried out by warriors when wounded. Names spoken at firesides like spells against loneliness. And sometimes, when the night was calm and the sky clear, humans would look at their dogs and wonder, what would we be without you? The answer was never said aloud, but deep down, they knew. They would be colder, they would be hungrier, they would be lonelier. Because now their footsteps were no longer alone. Every human story from that point forward, every hunt, every journey, every home, had paw prints running beside it, not behind, beside, and that changed everything. As the humans spread, so did their companions. Into the frost-bitten north, into the storm-lashed coasts, into the deep valleys and golden plains, the dogs followed. But the lands were not the same, and neither were the lives lived upon them. In the far north, winter never left. The sun hid for months. The ice never melted. Here, survival was a test of endurance. The humans wore furs thicker than any summer could soften. They built homes of packed snow and hunted on frozen rivers. And beside them ran the first snow dogs. Not by name, not by breed, not yet. But already they were different. Their bodies grew broader. Their coats thickened. Tails curled for warmth. They could run for hours across snowdrifts without tiring. They pulled, hauled, guarded. And when the ice cracked and men fell through, it was often a dog who stayed at the edge barking until the others returned. They became not just hunters' helpers, but lifelines. In the wide-open grasslands of the east, the world stretched like an endless sea of gold. Wind raced across the steppes. Wolves still ruled here. But so did riders. The humans had learned to tame horses, to move with the herds, to strike fast and disappear. And their dogs matched them, lean, long-legged, sharp-eyed. They chased with silence. They guarded herds from afar. They slept lightly and woke before any danger approached. Speed was their gift, loyalty their bond. They were the first coursers, not in name, but in spirit. Dogs of chase, dogs of motion, dogs who could run as far and as fast as a horse and return without command. Farther south, in warmer lands, Humans no longer wandered. They stayed. They planted. They built. They began to gather in places they called home, not for a season, but for years. And the dogs stayed too, not to hunt, but to watch. They lay at the edge of the fields, watching over grain stores. They barked at strangers who came too close to sleeping infants. They patrolled fences made of wood and stone. They became guardians. Not fierce, but firm. They didn't need to bite. Their bark was enough. Their presence, a warning. The first village dogs, not bred in cages or chosen for trophies, but shaped by work, by time, by need. Elsewhere, in rocky forests and tangled hills, humans tracked game on foot, slow, silent, patient. So too did their dogs. They crept low to the ground. They froze mid-step. They circled prey and flushed birds from brush. They learned to listen not to commands. There were still no words, no whistles, no leashes, but to rhythm, to gesture, to the subtle weight of a human's breath. They were the first hunting partners, not slaves, not servants, partners. Chosen not by breeding, but by presence, by that feeling. This one understands. Over time, differences became patterns. Thick coats in the snow, slender legs on the plains, heavy jaws in the jungle, light feet in the village. Without names, without charts, without any plan, the first dog breeds were being born, not in kennels, but in life. Born from fire and followed by loyalty, shaped by climate, molded by task, held together by something deeper than instinct, belonging, because everywhere humans went, through every climate, every hardship, every silence. They brought two things, fire and dogs. They no longer imagined a world without them. And the dogs? They no longer remembered a world before us. Not truly. The bond was old now. Old enough that even pups born deep in the mountains or beside desert camps or on icy cliffs knew to run toward a voice and sleep by a fire and bark when danger was near. They no longer belonged to the wild, they belonged with us. For a long time, dogs simply were. They lived, they loved, they followed, they hunted, guarded, played, healed. But they were not shaped, not yet, by intention, until one day, someone chose, not just to feed the fastest or protect the strongest, but to keep the gentlest. A pup, small and quiet, who didn't bark at night. A pup who followed a child not for food, but for friendship. Someone said, "This one, I want more like this." And everything changed. It started slowly. One litter after another, people began to notice that some dogs were not just useful, they were special. Some barked less, some herded better, some waited longer, some never left your side, even when unasked. And so, for the first time, humans did not wait to see which dog would stay. They chose which would stay. They kept two like-minded animals near the fire. They let them breed. And from that moment on, humans were not just companions to dogs. They were creators. It wasn't conscious, not fully, not at first. But with every choice came change. In the mountain village, the black dog with the booming bark was kept close. His pups would guard the goats. On the riverbank, the slender swimmer who leapt from boats and returned with fish was given extra food. Her pups would inherit the water. In the valley, the spotted pup who danced for children, never bit, and wagged his tail for strangers. He was called Blessed, and he was never sent away. Soon differences grew sharper, ears curled, legs shortened, tails coiled, eyes widened. Dogs began to reflect the worlds they were shaped by, but also the hearts of those who shaped them. In the frozen north, dogs became tanks of muscle and fur, meant to pull, to survive, to protect. In the highlands, dogs became clever, sharp-eyed, obsessed with motion, meant to herd, to manage, to understand. In the warm gardens of early cities, dogs became ornaments, small, soft, friendly, meant to be adored. People no longer just needed dogs, they wanted them, not only for work, but for comfort, for pride, for memory. Some tribes began to bury dogs with their dead. Some carved them in stone, some painted them on cave walls, not chasing prey, but sitting beside the fire, head lifted, watching the stars with their human. These were not wild creatures. They were something else. They were mirrors, and in each mirror, humanity saw something different. Some saw courage, some saw loyalty, some saw status, some saw love. And love, once again, proved powerful, more powerful than instinct, more lasting than fear, more shaping than nature. In one village, an old man raised a small dog who could barely walk. It barked once a day. It hunted nothing. It was too weak to guard even the chickens. But the man loved it. And in his eyes, that love was enough. He made room in his bed for the dog. He saved scraps from every meal. And when the dog died, he wept longer than he had for some men. No one understood why, but he did. The dog had become a part of him, not useful, not necessary, just part. That was the new magic. Dogs were no longer defined only by what they did. They were defined by what they meant. And once something has meaning, it cannot be undone, not even by time, not even by death. So when you look at a dog today, whether it runs with sleds, or guards a home, or simply sleeps at your feet, you are not just seeing an animal. You are seeing 10,000 years of choices, 10,000 years of love and fire and loyalty passed down in paws and eyes and silent understanding. You are seeing the shape of us, the parts of us we wished to keep and chose to pass on. And they are still here, watching us, walking beside us, waiting, always, to be chosen again. There came a time when humans stopped asking, "What can this dog do for me?" And instead they whispered, "What does this dog know?" Because some dogs did not chase. They did not pull or guard or herd. They simply sat at the edge of the village, at the mouth of a cave, at the door to the dead. And people began to notice something strange. When a child was about to be born, the dog at the fire would lift its head before anyone stirred. When a storm was coming, they would shiver under shelter while the sky still seemed calm. And when someone died, some dogs would not eat. Some would not leave the body. Some would howl, long, low, aching sounds that made even the strongest men fall silent. People did not understand it, but they felt it. The dogs knew something. Something beyond scent, beyond instinct, beyond the world of tooth and paw. In one mountain tribe, they said a dog could smell death 3 days before it arrived. In another, they believed dogs saw spirits walking at the edge of moonlight. And in the desert, where stars are countless and silence is pure, there was a saying, "When a dog stares into the dark, it is waiting for someone you've forgotten." The boundary between life and death, between the known and unknown, was not patrolled by warriors, but by dogs. And so began their new role, keepers of the threshold. They stood at doorways, not just to homes, but to other worlds, to the past, to the unseen, to the sacred. They became symbols, not of strength, not of power, but of presence, the one who never leaves your side, even when you no longer breathe. Some tribes began to bury dogs with their dead, not as offerings, but as guides. They believed the dog would walk beside the soul into the next world, not ahead, not behind, but always beside, because no soul, human or otherwise, should walk alone into the dark. In faraway lands, people carved statues of dogs to place at temple gates. They were not snarling beasts. They were calm, watching, still. They were the guardians of peace, not fighters, witnesses. And in dreams, dogs began to appear, not wild, fanged wolves, but gentle, wordless watchers, sitting quietly, staring into something the dreamer could not see. Sometimes they led the dreamer out of fear. Sometimes they waited at a path that split in two. Sometimes they simply sat until morning came. No commands, no explanations, just presence. People began to speak to their dogs, not just in jest or command or praise, but in confession, in mourning, in prayer. Because deep down, humans began to believe something ancient, something they couldn't prove, but felt in their bones, that dogs could carry things we could not. Grief, loneliness, memory, and above all, loyalty that did not end at death. One boy, orphaned in a storm, wandered the hills for days. Only his dog followed. When they were found, the boy was half conscious. The dog was still awake, still watching. Some said the dog had kept the boy warm. Others said it had scared off wolves. But the boy, once he could speak again, said only one thing. I dreamed I was in a cave of stars, and he walked beside me the whole way. From that day forward, the village elders declared, a dog is not just for this life. And so the stories grew, of dogs who returned in dreams, of dogs who barked at ghosts, of dogs who sat for days at graves long forgotten. They became more than animals, more than companions. They became anchors, holding the world of the living close to the world we leave behind. And still today, when a dog stares into nothing, ears alert, breath steady, unmoving, some part of us still wonders, what do you see that I do not? It was inevitable. Wherever humans went, conflict followed. Disagreements over fire, over food, over fear. Territories grew, so did tension. And in time, war was born. Not in the way we know it now. No flags, no armies, no anthems, just sharpened stone, clenched fists, and the silent decision, you will not take what is mine. And beside them, always, stood the dogs. At first, they were simply caught in it. When one tribe attacked another, dogs barked, dogs bit, dogs bled. They defended without being asked, they died without being remembered. But humans began to notice. A dog could hear the enemy before the enemy heard them. A dog could smell fear in the wind. A dog could charge without hesitation, fast, low, silent. And once again, the choice was made, not just to keep dogs, but to train them, to harness the instincts already there, to turn loyalty into weapon, to turn the bond into power. And so, the first war dogs were born. They were not bred for violence, but for resolve, the kind that did not shake at the clash of stone, the kind that ran toward danger when others froze, the kind that stood guard over the wounded while the battlefield fell silent. They carried messages across smoke and fire. They searched for survivors under fallen trees. They stood atop walls and watched for shadows. They were not honored. They were not buried. But the soldiers knew. When everything else failed, when men turned on each other, when courage thinned, the dogs still ran forward. Some wore armor, some bore torches, some died without a sound, teeth still clenched in enemy skin. And yet, not all dogs of war were born of blood. Some saved more than they hurt. One tribe told of a dog who led women and children through a mountain pass in the night after their village was set aflame. It returned, injured, to lead the elders next, and died at the edge of the trail, tail still wagging. They called it the one who waits. In another war, a dog dragged 3 wounded men to shelter before collapsing. The soldiers built no shrine. They just told the story. And sometimes that was enough. Because war in its cruelty also reveals truth. And the truth was this. Dogs did not fight for glory, or land, or power. They fought for us, for the ones they slept beside, for the children who once fed them, for the fires they knew by scent. In the dust of battlefields, paw prints mingled with footprints. And sometimes it was a dog who returned to camp first, bloodied, limping, to show the way. There were dogs who sat beside the dead, refusing to leave. There were dogs who mourned, long after the war drums stopped. And there were dogs who could not return to peace. They paced the village edge, ears twitching at every sound, waiting for something only they could still hear. Some say those were the dogs who saw too much. Others say they simply remembered what we tried to forget. But whether praised or forgotten, buried or burned, the dogs of war became part of our story. They carried our pain. They followed us into darkness. And when the battle ended, if we were lucky, they still stayed, still watched, still waited, still believed, not in the cause, not in the victory, but in us. And that was their triumph. After the fire, there is silence. After the storm, there is stillness. And after war, there is grief, not just for the dead, but for the living. Those who return with cracked minds and quiet eyes, those who forget how to laugh, how to sleep, how to trust that peace will last. In this space, where words fail and rituals crumble, the dogs remained. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't flinch at scars. They didn't turn away from nightmares. They simply sat at the feet of broken men, at the doorways of women who had lost too much, at the cribs of children who no longer cried. They didn't fix anything. They didn't try. They just stayed. And in staying, they healed. They reminded us of the warmth of another heartbeat. They curled against us when we were cold, not just from winter, but from the kind of emptiness no fire could touch. They looked into our eyes, not with pity, but with presence. "I see you," they seemed to say. "You're still here. So am I." In quiet mountain huts, men who could no longer speak to people whispered to dogs. In shattered villages, women shared their last crumbs with pups born under fallen roofs. And slowly, something shifted. The ache became softer. The nights became quieter. The world began to rebuild itself, stone by stone, step by step. And the dogs were always there. They didn't lead. They didn't push. But they waited, just ahead on the path, tails wagging, not rushing, just hoping. There's an old tale told in many lands. A man who had lost everything wandered into the forest to die. He sat beneath a tree and closed his eyes, and as the cold crept in, a dog he didn't recognize curled beside him and refused to leave. The man didn't die. He lived, because that night he remembered how it felt to be needed. We don't always need words. Sometimes we just need something to stay when all else leaves. And dogs have always known how to stay. Not because we trained them, not because we commanded them, because long ago we gave them a place beside our fire, and they chose never to leave it. Even when the fire died, even when we didn't feel we deserved company, even when we forgot how to care, they stayed. And that staying was a kind of love older than forgiveness, quieter than prayer, stronger than fear. They didn't rescue us from grief. They walked through it with us, step by step, night by night, tail wag by tired heartbeat, until one day we stood again, not alone, never alone, long before books, before ink, before alphabets carved stories into stone. There were fires, there were voices, there were dogs, and where there were dogs, there were stories. Because somewhere in every village, in every tribe, in every place where the stars watched down upon human sleep, someone whispered a tale that began like this: "There was once a dog." In the West, they told of a gate that led to the land of the dead. No mortal could pass, no soul could return. But standing there, jaws closed, eyes aflame, tail still, was Cerberus, the three-headed guardian. One head to see the past, one head to watch the present, one head forever looking toward the future. He did not chase or kill or roam. He simply stood. Because not all power is in motion. Some is in keeping watch, forever. In the East, they told of the Tianquan, the heavenly dog, a creature so mighty it could eat the moon, not from malice, but hunger or sorrow. When eclipses came and darkness swallowed the sky, people banged drums and lit fires, crying out, "Spit it out, loyal one, let light return." And it did, because sometimes even gods need to be reminded. Among the Egyptians, the dog was more than companion. It was the face of the god Anubis, guardian of the tombs, keeper of the scales. It was he who weighed the heart of the dead against the feather of truth. And it was he who guided the soul through the shadows. His ears were always alert, his gaze eternal. Not punishment, not judgment, just passage. In Mesoamerica, the people told of Xoloitzcuintli, the hairless dog of obsidian skin. They were buried with the dead, not as tribute, but as guides. The underworld was treacherous, 9 rivers, many trials. And only a dog, faithful in life and death, could lead a soul safely through. In Japan, the Inugami were spirits born of sorrow and loyalty. Dogs who had been wronged or died in devotion, who returned as protectors, or sometimes as revenge. They were both feared and revered, because even love, twisted by pain, can become something otherworldly. In the North, the people spoke of black dogs who appeared at crossroads during storms. Not beasts, but warnings, not omens of death, but of choice. A black dog who stared you down in the rain wasn't trying to hurt you. It was asking, "Do you know where you're going? Are you ready for what waits at the end?" And across cultures, across centuries, there were always the tales of the white dog, sometimes seen in dreams, sometimes at the edge of the forest, sometimes just after someone passed. White, silent, watching. Never barking, never chasing, just being. The white dog was never a threat. It was a memory. It was someone who had returned, not as a ghost, but as love that could not be erased. Why do all these stories exist? Why did so many people, in so many places, look at the same creature and see not just fur and fang, but eternity? Maybe because dogs were always there. When we cried, when we broke, when we bled, when we laughed. Maybe because dogs never needed words, and neither did spirits. Maybe because dogs remind us that presence, silent, loyal, unshakable, is the oldest form of love, and love, when deep enough, writes itself into myth. So yes, there was once a dog, there was always a dog, and if the stories are true, there always will be. We built cities, and towers, and screens that never sleep. We lit up the sky so brightly we forgot how to see the stars. We made everything louder, faster, smarter, better, except ourselves. Because somewhere along the way we lost something. Something quiet, something simple, something like the sound of paws on a wooden floor at midnight. In the age of machines, people began to forget how to be still, to sit, to breathe, to wait without needing anything more than a heartbeat beside them. But the dogs remembered. They still sat, still waited, still watched the door when you were gone too long. And in the softest of rebellions, they brought us back. A man who hadn't cried in 20 years wept when his dog rested its head on his knee. After a long day he thought would end in silence. A child who spoke to no one read bedtime stories to a golden retriever with eyes full of patience and ears that heard more than language. A woman in a hospital bed, forgotten by the world, smiled for the first time in weeks because a dog lay beside her feet. Warm, breathing, real. They don't need to understand our devices. They don't care for status or trends or schedules. They just care that we come home, that we speak kindly, that we remember how to play. Dogs in this strange new world have become something ancient once again. Companions, keepers, witnesses of our real selves. Not the selves we upload, not the selves we perform, but the one who collapses on the couch at the end of the day, tired, flawed, human, and they love that person unconditionally. We give them names, birthdays, tiny sweaters. We carry them in strollers. We call them our children. We mourn them like blood, and maybe, just maybe, that's not ridiculous at all. Maybe it's sacred, because in a world that teaches us to move on, dogs teach us to stay, to sit beside grief, to chase joy like it's always the first time, to forgive quickly, to love loudly, to return every time someone says your name. When we scroll past each other, they nudge our hands. When we work too late, they lay their head on our keyboard. When we forget to go outside, they bring us the leash. They are still the ones who bring us back to the real world. Not the big one, not the loud one, but the one that matters. The world of eye contact, of shared meals, of gentle touches, of presence. Some say we don't deserve dogs, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is, dogs remind us who we could be if we lived with more patience, more wonder, more love. And they don't judge us when we fail. They just try again tomorrow. Same tail wag, same walk, same waiting at the door. In the age of noise, they are the quiet that heals. In the age of rush, they are the pause that saves us. In the age of forgetting, they remember us, exactly as we are, and exactly as we were. And they love both. It happens softly, not like thunder, not like war, but like a leaf falling on a quiet morning, like a breath that never returns. The end. We never think it will come. Not really. Because how could something so full of life, so full of you, ever stop moving? But it does. One day the walks grow shorter, the eyes get cloudier, the tail wags slower. And you see it in the way they look at you, not with fear, but with trust. It's okay. You don't have to hold on for me. But of course you do. You hold tighter. Because how do you say goodbye to the one who taught you how to stay? On that last morning, the world is still. You do not speak much. Words feel heavy, useless. So you sit, and like always, they rest their head on your lap, not because they are in pain, not because they want anything, just to be close. Like always, even at the end, they are trying to comfort you. And when it's time, when their breath slows and their eyes close and your tears fall into their fur, they are not afraid. Because they are home. In your arms, in your scent, in the life you built together. Afterward, the house feels too quiet. The leash hangs by the door, still. The toys stay where they were left. The bowl is untouched. You expect the footsteps, the bark, the familiar shape curled at your feet. But they do not come. Grief sits heavy, like a second skin, like silence you can't escape. And yet, in the middle of that silence, you remember something. A noise. Not loud, just the faint sound of claws on tile. The softest exhale by your bed. A dream where you turn around, and they're sitting there. Waiting, tail wagging. Some say they're just dogs, but they were never just anything. They were memory, wrapped in fur. They were forgiveness with 4 legs. They were love, made simple and patient and pure. And when they go, they don't take that love with them. They leave it behind, in the shoes they chewed, in the trails you walked, in the corner of the couch where the sun still lands every afternoon. They leave it in you, and you carry it for the rest of your life. So maybe this isn't goodbye. Maybe it's just the start of a new kind of walk, one where the leash is invisible. But the presence? Still there, in every step, in every pause, in every time you look toward the door and almost call their name. And when your own time comes, when you too grow tired and your breath slows, maybe, just maybe, there will be a tail wagging at the edge of the dark, waiting, like always, because no one should walk into the next world alone.